welcome back to the Jobless Bum YouTube channel. I hope you're having a fantastic day today. Today, we're going to be ranking the logos of the NHL, the National Hockey League, in a tier list, and we're going to see which ones are really good and which ones are really bad. And without any further ado, let's get right into it. Starting off our tier list, we do have the Calgary Flames. And in terms of logos with just letters, I think this is really good. You got those flames in the back that are showing some sort of movement. I think the font of the C is really cool. This is honestly one of my favorite logos in a lot of sports, just because of its simplicity and taking what could have been like a really bad logo with just the letter and turning it into what I think is an S tier logo. Plus, I like the orange outline and the red. I think the colors are really good too. So I really like that. I'm going to put the Calgary Flames in the S tier. Next up, we do have the Buffalo Sabres. And I think it's a really cool name. The Sabres, which is like the sword that is shown in this logo. And I like the crossing of the swords. That's a classic representation, so I like that. I like the fact that they have the buffalo in the logo as well, symbolizing the city. I think that's really cool too. Honestly, I think we're going to start out this tier list with 2 S tiers in a row. I think this logo is really good too. Next up, we do have the Toronto Maple Leafs, and this logo is pretty classic looking. You got that font in the middle. It looks pretty classic in terms of the font. It looks like something you'd see in like an old-timey newspaper. I like the maple leaf. I like the fact that they didn't just make it white. They gave it those little, I don't know what they're called, but the lines in the middle of the leaf that are in actual leaves too. So I think that's a good touch. I think it's a solid logo. I don't know necessarily that it's a top tier logo. I'm going to put the Maple Leafs in the B tier. I think it's a classic logo. It's iconic, but there's also definitely room where you can improve. So for that reason, it's going into the B tier. Next up, we do have the Winnipeg Jets. And this is an interesting logo. I do like the fact that the jet in the logo kind of matches up with, I don't know what this is supposed to be in the background. I thought at first it was a maple leaf, but it looks maybe to have too many points. Maybe it is a maple leaf, but I think that's cool. There's some sort of unity in the logo. It makes it feel like there's something happening in the middle there. Got some nice symmetry. I kind of don't like this little indentation in the outline in the logo, but I do recognize if you kept it going around there, I think it would have looked weird. I think the solution would have just been to make this middle part a little bit smaller, but I think it's a solid logo. I don't think it's like necessarily bad. I'm going to put this one in the B tier. I think it's a solid logo. There's not really much that I can say bad about it. I think it's an all right logo. Next up, we do have the Vancouver Canucks, and this is an interesting logo. I think a Canuck is just what you would call a Canadian person. And you have this interesting like shark / orca kind of thing going on. I'm not exactly sure what this is supposed to be, but it's coming out of the water maybe, but it also forms a C, which is for Canucks. I don't know. I'm not really that big of a fan of this logo, to be honest. I think there probably could have been a better representation. I do think it looks menacing, but it also looks kind of generic at the same time. So I'm going to put the Vancouver Canucks in the C tier. I think there's definitely room where this logo could have been better, but it's also not like very bad. I do appreciate that they tried something. Next up, we do have the Tampa Bay Lightning. And I think this is a really cool logo. It's very simple, very straight to the point, but then again, lightning is also very straight and simple to the point. Comes from above and then it comes down, you know? So I think that's interesting. I like the colors. I like this white and this blue combination. I think that's a really good combination. They didn't try to do too much. It's pretty simple. I don't know necessarily what I would do to change it. I don't think it's an S tier logo though. I'm going to put the Lightning in the A, but it's on the precipice of being in the S. If they reworked it a little bit to make it a little bit more, I don't know. I just feel like there's something a little bit more that could be done. It's a bit too simple, but I can envision a world where this could become an S tier logo. So for now, we'll put it in the A tier. Next up, we do have the Colorado Avalanche, and I really like the fact that this is an A. It looks like an A, but it's also a mountain representing the Avalanche. And an avalanche being a fall of ice from near the top of the mountain coming downward. So I like this sort of movement of the snow that comes down. And it also like adds some depth to it too. I think that's really cool. And then you got like what appears to perhaps be a smaller mountain as well. I think it's a really cool logo. I'm going to put this one in the A tier, which is, I guess, is kind of fitting because it is the Avalanche. I think it's a really good logo. We're going to put it in the A tier, but I don't know if it's an S tier. I think it's really solid, really good. We're going to put it in the A tier. Next up, we do have the Pittsburgh Penguins, and this is another classic logo. The penguin playing hockey, I think, is really cool. I think the penguin is an interesting concept for a team nickname. You got this triangle in the back, too, which is pretty cool. The black and yellow, obviously, is the color scheme of Pittsburgh for all of their teams. You know, the Pirates, Steelers, and the Penguins. I think it's a good logo. I don't know if it's an A tier or an S tier. I think it's a really solid logo, though. I think we're going to put it in the B tier. It's classic, but it could be better. It could be more modernized, so B tier it is. Next up, we do have the Seattle Kraken, which is a new team in the NHL to the previous season, to 2022-2021. It's an interesting logo. It is just a letter, so that does dock some points in my book, but I do like the colors. It kind of does look like a Kraken. I think it's a bit too simplistic for me. Usually, I'm not that big of a fan of logos that are just a letter, but in this case, I think the colors and this little red eye, I'm assuming, I don't know what exactly that's supposed to be, but I think that gives it an interesting dimension as well. I'm going to put the Kraken in the C tier. It is just a letter, so I don't know necessarily that there's much you can do unless you're the Flames or the Avalanche. You got to do something pretty cool for me to like a logo that's just a letter. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in the C tier. Next up, we do have the Dallas Stars. I think this logo is pretty bad. I don't like this diagonal direction they've seemed to put everything in, especially the star. Like, I can understand maybe the D being slanted to give it some movement, but this just makes it asymmetrical. I don't like that. It makes you like think that it's uneven, and overall I think it's just a bad logo. I don't like the colors either. I'm not a big fan of this green. It kind of just looks boring. I don't like it. I don't like the Dallas Stars logo. And you know what? It's fitting it is a D because that's the tier we're going to put it in. It's just not a good logo. Next up, we do have the San Jose Sharks. And I do like this logo somewhat. It does look pretty menacing, looks pretty mysterious. I like the fact that the hockey stick is being broken by the shark biting on it. I think that's really cool, really menacing. The colors are all right as well. I like this little triangle in the background, giving it some added depth. This little trident at the back I think is pretty cool. I don't think that it's a bad logo, but this looks like a logo that's from the 90s. Like, you can tell it's a dated logo. So I think you could definitely update this logo because it's definitely of its time. It's not a classic logo. This isn't a logo where I say like, oh, this will be a good logo 50 years from now. I think so. For that reason, I'm going to put it in the B tier. I think it's all right, but it could definitely use some improvements. Next up, we do have the Vegas Golden Knights, and I still, to this day, I remember when they first announced this team, I was like, wow, that is such a stupid name. And I understand the connection to Army. I think the owner of the Golden Knights went to Army, and that was their name, so he named the team in honor of that. I just don't like the name. I think it's kind of, I just don't think it's good. And I don't like this logo either. Like, this gold isn't vibrant. It's just dull and boring. I do like there's a little V in here that I didn't notice until now, so I guess that's pretty cool. It's just so bland and boring. When like you have the Las Vegas team, you could like do like something so cool. I don't know, something so vibrant to represent the city more. I just don't think it's a very good representation of Las Vegas. So for that reason, I'm going to put this logo in the D tier. It's just boring. And more than anything, I hate boring. I hate boring when it's not good. Like, you can have a logo that's good and boring, and I'll rank it pretty high, like the Maple Leaf. That's a logo that's boring and good. This is a logo that's boring boring and bad, so it's going into the D tier. Now, for this next logo, some people will say, Jobless Bum, you're a little bit biased on this one, but I don't care. We do have the Columbus Blue Jackets, my hometown team, but I do like this logo a lot. You got this star representing the capital of Ohio, which Columbus is. I think that's really cool. And you got this Ohio State flag wrapping around it, the most unique state flag out there, in my opinion, because it is a triangle. And you got it rolling around the star, showing some movement, showing it's waving, showing it's ferocious. I really like it a lot. And again, some people may say I'm biased, but I'm going to put the Columbus Blue Jackets in the S tier. It's a really good logo. All right, next up, we do have the Minnesota Wild. And I really like this logo a lot. The Wild is such a broad interpretation of a team nickname. You could go so many directions with this. And you know what? I applaud the Minnesota Wild for saying, we are going to take all of those interpretations and put them into one logo. You have this beast of an animal. It honestly kind of looks like the Mr. Beast logo, so I don't know if Mr. Beast plagiarized off of the Minnesota Wild. But you got this beautiful landscape in the background. You got a little path right there. You got some trees. You got the night sky. You got the North Star, which Minnesota used to have a team called the North Stars, and they moved to Dallas to become the Dallas Stars, I believe. So I like this homage to the history in the city, since they couldn't take the Stars name back. So I think it's a really good logo. It's just got so much meaning, so much depth. And I think as a logo by itself, if you're just gonna take it for what it is, I think it's a really good logo too. So for that reason, I'm gonna put the Minnesota Wild into the S tier. It's a really good logo. Next up, we do have the Ottawa Senators. And they've taken the interpretation of a senator to be a Roman senator. So they have this kind of centurion look to them, which I think is pretty cool. It looks very distinguished, very proper. It does kind of look dated, so I'm sure there's some way they could modernize this. It does look classic, but in a dated way. So I'm going to put it in the B tier. I think there's some improvements they could make to this logo, but it's still a really solid logo right now. But I think there's some modernizing they could do to it to elevate it to the A or the S tier. Next up, we do have the Detroit Red Wings. And this is a really cool logo. I think a Red Wing has to do something with cars, which Detroit is known for. They are the Motor City, where a lot of car manufacturing in the US did take place. It looks classic. This red and this white is a really good combination of colors. Generally, I like any primary color with just white. I think that's a really good basis for a logo. So as much as I hate the Red Wings, I can't say that this is a bad logo. But I can't justify putting it in the S tier just because I don't like the Red Wings. So I will admit some bias on here, but I'm going to put the Red Wings in the A tier. But if I was going to look at it objectively, probably should be in the S tier, but I'm going to put it in the A tier. Next up, we do have the Edmonton Oilers, and you have this representation, I believe, of like oil drilling, which is okay, I guess. But this font, I don't like. The colors are all right, I guess. But it just, there's a lot of good concepts in this logo, but I don't feel like they really come together to make a good, cohesive logo. I don't know. I don't really like this logo. I'm going to put it in the C tier. I don't think it's as bad as these logos in the D tier, but I don't think it's as good as any of these logos. So it's going in the C tier. Next up, we do have the New York Rangers. And again, this is another logo where it's just so boring. They decided to do nothing with it. It's just not good. Like, I understand maybe like a badge for like a ranger. That's fine. But it's just so boring. The colors are good, I guess. But it's just the name of the team written out. They didn't try to do anything. So for that reason, I can't put it any higher than the D tier. I understand that it's perhaps a classic logo, and it looks all right, but it's just so boring that I can't rank it higher than the D tier. Or you know what? It looks all right, so it is kind of boring. I'll bump it up to the C tier. I think D tier might be a little bit too harsh on it, but I don't think it's any better than the C tier. Next up, we do have the Washington Capitals, and this is a really bad logo. They just wrote out the name of the team. You do have like a hockey stick. I guess that's cool. There's some stars there too, but there's not really a representation of who the Capitals are. They gave it all to us. They just wrote it out, but they didn't like try to symbolize anything, at least from what I can see and what I can interpret. So I really don't think this is a good logo. I'm going to put this one in the D tier. This one's really bad. They need to fix this ASAP. Next up, we do have the Florida Panthers. And this is an interesting logo because it used to be a pretty bad logo. It looked pretty generic. It looked pretty dated. And they updated it so it doesn't look as dated anymore, but it still looks very generic. But I will give them props. It does look modern, if a bit generic. So I'm going to put it in the B tier. It's a solid logo, but it's not a logo where I have any strong opinions on it. So I think that's perfect for the B tier. Next up, we do have the Chicago Blackhawks, and there's a lot of controversy around this logo. Some say that it's an offensive representation of Native American culture. And I'm not going to say whether that's true or not, but the fact that there is some sort of division on that, I think it makes it a not good logo. Because if a logo is trying to bring people together to support your team, if a logo creates division, I feel like that's the definition of a bad logo. So for that reason, it's going to be a D tier because it doesn't represent the fans and perhaps is offensive to some people. So I feel like by definition, it can't be a good logo. Next up, we do have the Carolina Hurricanes. And this is a really simple logo, but I think it's a really good logo. I think it's simplistic, but it gives a sense of dynamism. It's movement, you know, and that's what a hurricane is. It's an agent of chaos. So I really like that representation of the logo. I don't think it's a S tier logo. I don't think it's the top of the cream of the crop. But you know what? Actually, I'm going to put it in the S tier. I think it's a pretty good logo. And I was looking at some of the other logos on the list and I'm like, do I really think it's worse than the Sabres? No. So I think it's a really good logo. We're going to put it in the S tier. Next up, we do have the Montreal Canadiens, or the Canadiens. And this logo is pretty simple. You may be wondering why they have this H in the middle, but it's to represent the French-speaking portions of their fan base. So the Canadiens, and then their name in French is, I don't know, I think this is a shortening of it, but they're called the Habs. So that is the French meaning of their name. I don't think it's too impressive other than that representation, but I think that lands it in the C tier, because if it was just the C and this H and it didn't have that other meaning to it, I think it would be a D tier logo. But I do like that they attempted, and I would say succeeded, in bringing people together with this logo. So I think this is a perfect C tier, and it is a C, so I guess that fits. Next up, we do have the Nashville Predators, and this is honestly one of my favorite logos in sports. It's really cool, and it's just so menacing. Like the saber-toothed tiger, like that is like an animal that I don't think many teams, if at all, have tried to emulate. So it's very unique in that aspect. They went for a more abstract color scheme too, which makes it feel almost more prehistoric as well in some way, because it's just so unnatural. And the teeth are really cool. I think this is a definite S tier. This is really good right here. I really like this logo a lot. Next up, we do have the St. Louis Blues, and I think this is a pretty good logo. You have the musical note, which represents the concept of the blues style of music, which is, I think, what they were going for, obviously. And it's got some sort of movement on it, too, because it's got this wing, which I think is really cool. And it's a pretty simple logo, but I think it's got some depth to it, too. I like the colors as well. I think the yellow was a nice choice to accentuate the blue. I'm going to put the Blues in the A tier. I don't think it's necessarily up to this S tier level, but I think it's a really good logo nonetheless. So we're going to put it in the A tier. Next up, we do have the New Jersey Devils, and this is an example of letter logos being executed in a really cool way, because this is just an N and a J for New Jersey, but you also have these horns and then this tail representing the concept of the devil. So I think that's really cool. It's pretty simple. It's pretty recognizable. I really like this logo. I don't think it's S tier material. I think there could be some improvements to the logo, but I think it's really good. I think it's going into the A tier. Next up, we do have the New York Islanders, which is a pretty cool logo. You have the Long Island of New York, which the Islanders are based on, and I think like somewhere over here. But I think it's a cool logo. You got that representation of the Long Island, which is really cool. And the Y kind of makes this hockey puck, which is pretty cool. I think the logo does look a bit dated, and there's probably some modernization you could do to it, but I think it looks pretty cool. I'm gonna put it in the B tier. I think it's a pretty solid logo, and it's fine where it is, but I can also see some improvement to it. Next up, we do have the Anaheim Ducks, and I gotta say, this logo is so bad. Like, compared to what the logo was before, it was a old style hockey goalie mask with a duck bill on it, which was really cool. And they got rid of it, and they got this weird D that kind of looks like a duck foot. I don't know. Whenever I think of like the most menacing part of a duck, I don't think of its webbed feet. I would think of like the beak or something, you know, like going like pecking at you or something, you know, but like this is really weird. I don't like it. I hate the colors too. They used to have this really cool like teal, purple, black, yellow color style, and then they just have this terrible, almost brownish gold, this orange, this black. It does not work at all. It's going in the D tier. This is an awful logo. Next up, we do have the Los Angeles Kings, and this one is really bad as well. This black and white color scheme. I think there's some ways you can make this work and be like cool and exciting, but this just looks not good. It's too simplistic. You have this crown on here representing the Kings, but it's just too small. I almost didn't recognize what that was. This is just a really bad logo. So I'm gonna put the LA Kings in the D tier. There's just nothing there. It just feels hollow and empty. But I guess that's pretty fitting for the city of Los Angeles. A lot of people would describe Los Angeles as being hollow and empty, so maybe it works. Next up, we do have the Boston Bruins, and it's just a B, you know, and you got these cool yellow things popping out as well in the circle, which is all right, but I mean, it's a Bruin, it's a bear. You could have done such cool stuff with the logo, and then you chose to cheap out and be just this generic looking B. I will say, in terms of letter logos, it is pretty tastefully executed, but it could have been so much better. So I'm gonna put it in the C tier. Next up, we do have the Philadelphia Flyers, and I will say this is a pretty unique logo, and I believe this is a pretty old logo, pretty dated, pretty classic, but it doesn't feel like it's dated. This feels like something that could have been come up with today. So I do appreciate the timelessness of this logo. I think it is a bit too simplistic, but this P and this movement, you know, representing flying, I think that's pretty cool. I'm going to put it in the C tier because it's right on the line of B and C. I'm going to put it in the B tier. I think it is just a letter, but it is pretty cool. It is pretty coolly executed. And the fact that it's been their logo for a long time, I think, gives it some points as well for its classicness. So I think a B tier is appropriate for this logo. Last up, we have the Arizona Coyotes, and this is just really boring. It looks very generic. Like, this looks like a logo that you would get in NHL, the video game, if you're like creating a team. And like, this is what the designers of the game came up with it for a generic logo. It's just bad. I can't really describe it other than that. It just looks very generic, and it's hollow. It's emotionless. Like, it doesn't look menacing either. It's just there. So I do applaud them for not just like giving it a letter, but it's just so boring. I can't put it any higher than C tier. I'm going to give you one final chance to look at our completed NHL logos tier list. Thank you so much for watching our NHL logos tier list video. Let me know what your favorite NHL logo is in the comments, and if you had any thoughts on our tier list. I'd be curious to know. Also, I would appreciate it if you absolutely demolish the like button. I would appreciate that. That helps me out a lot. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and as always, be sure to stay safe.